It began like any other Sunday in the small town of Willow Creek. The morning air carried a chill, the streets were quiet, and the towering steeple of St. Mark's Church stood like a sentinel over the town. It was a place of solace, of community, a place where nothing ever seemed out of place. That's what made what happened next all the more disturbing. On the morning of October 12th, 1997, 17-year-old Emily Carter attended the early church service with her parents, just as she had done countless times before. She sat in her usual spot, third pew from the front, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her blue eyes seemed distant that day, as if something weighed heavily on her mind. If anyone noticed, they never said a word. After the service, the congregation spilled onto the church steps, exchanging greetings and weekend plans. Emily lingered, speaking briefly with a friend before stepping away, her expression unreadable. Then she turned, waved to her parents, and walked off down the sidewalk alone. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. In a town where everyone knew everyone, Emily's absence was noticed quickly. By evening, concern turned to panic. She had never been the type to disappear without explanation. Her parents called friends, checked familiar places, even drove the back roads leading out of town, but there was no sign of her. Hours passed, and the dread settled in. Something was wrong. When midnight came and went with no word from Emily, the Carter family reported her missing. The local sheriff's department, accustomed to handling petty thefts and the occasional bar fight, was suddenly faced with a case that carried a weight far beyond anything they had dealt with before. Flyers went up around town the next morning, Emily's smiling face plastered on telephone poles, storefront windows, and the bulletin board inside St. Mark's Church. Volunteers combed the surrounding woods, called out her name into the crisp autumn air, hoping for an answer that never came. Then the rumors started. Whispers spread through Willow Creek. Quiet at first, but growing with each passing hour. Some said Emily had run away. Others claimed she had been seen arguing with someone outside the church. The uncertainty bred fear, and fear bred suspicion. No one wanted to believe that something terrible had happened in their town, but as the days stretched on, denial became harder to cling to. By the end of the week, the town had changed. Doors were locked earlier, curfews were enforced, and conversations became hushed. Parents clutched their children's hands tighter, eyes darting toward darkened streets with newfound wariness. In the quiet corners of St. Mark's, candles flickered beneath Emily's missing person flyer, a silent vigil for a girl who had walked away from church one Sunday morning and never came home. The unspoken question lingered in the air, heavier with each passing day. Who had been watching Emily that morning, and what had they been waiting for? The silence in Willow Creek was deafening. Days had passed since Emily Carter was last seen, and the weight of her absence pressed heavily on the town. Streets that were once bustling with chatter and routine had become subdued, as though life itself had paused. The missing posters, now slightly worn from the wind, were a haunting reminder that someone among them knew more than they were saying. Law enforcement ramped up their efforts, conducting interviews and retracing Emily's steps from that Sunday morning. Every lead seemed to circle back to the church, the last place she was seen. The congregation was questioned, neighbors pressed for details, but the answers were all the same. No one knew where Emily had gone, or at least no one was willing to say. Rumors began to mutate into something darker. The idea that she had run away became less believable as more people came forward to describe Emily as responsible, the type of girl who would never leave without a word. Parents in Willow Creek began whispering amongst themselves, sharing glances filled with unspoken fears. If Emily could vanish without a trace, could their daughters be next? The sheriff's department organized search parties, sending volunteers into the dense woods surrounding the town. It was a place children were warned about. Thick trees and winding trails made it easy to get lost, and the shadows seemed deeper than anywhere else. The air was heavy with anticipation, each footstep crunching against fallen leaves as searchers called out Emily's name. But the forest remained silent. Then a discovery was made. A mile beyond the church, near an old service road seldom used, a small object was found nestled between the roots of an oak tree, a single silver cross on a delicate chain, glinting under the dappled sunlight. Emily's mother confirmed it immediately. Her daughter had worn it every day since childhood. It was the first tangible piece of evidence that something had happened. The search intensified. Bloodhounds were brought in, tracing scents that wove through the trees before vanishing altogether. It was as if Emily had been swallowed by the earth itself. The town's fear deepened. Emily was no longer just a missing girl. She was something more, a question that demanded an answer that someone was keeping hidden. The wind howled through the trees as the search party moved deeper into the forest. The towering pines stretched high above them, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. Each step forward carried the weight of uncertainty, every rustling leaf a reminder that they weren't alone in the woods. Then a sharp cry rang out. A volunteer had stumbled upon something, partially buried beneath a blanket of damp leaves. The others rushed to his side, flashlights cutting through the dimming daylight. What lay before them sent a chill through the air. A shallow grave. The sheriff kneeled down, his breath slow and measured as he brushed away the dirt. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay. Then the truth revealed itself. Emily's lifeless form, her skin pale against the dark earth. Her hands folded across her chest, her dress torn, her once bright eyes now staring into nothingness. Shock gripped the town as news spread. Emily Carter was no longer missing. She was gone, and someone had put her there. For Willow Creek, the nightmare was only beginning. The question was no longer where Emily was, but who had taken her life, and why. The air inside the sheriff's office was heavy. A map of Willow Creek lay spread across the table, dotted with red markers, each one a failed lead, a dead end. Sheriff Tom Grayson leaned over it, rubbing a hand over his face, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. This was no longer a missing person case. It was murder. Detectives from the state had been called in, their presence unsettling the quiet town even further. Interviews resumed with renewed intensity, but each response felt rehearsed, guarded. Someone knew more than they were saying. The autopsy confirmed what many had feared. Emily had been strangled. No signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. It was as if she had known her killer. The people of Willow Creek wanted answers. The sheriff wanted justice. But the deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. Emily Carter had secrets, and now so did the town. Secrets were buried in Willow Creek, and as the investigation pressed forward, they began to surface. A witness came forward, someone who had seen Emily arguing outside the church the morning she disappeared. But the person she had confronted wasn't a stranger. It was someone the entire town trusted. The police turned their attention to Daniel Whitaker, Emily's boyfriend of 2 years. He had been notably absent from the initial search efforts, only appearing after her body was discovered. When questioned, Daniel claimed he had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance and provided an alibi for the night she went missing. He insisted he had been at home, playing video games with his younger brother. But something didn't sit right with investigators. The alibi was too clean, too rehearsed. When detectives spoke with his brother, there was hesitation, small inconsistencies that made them question the story further. Then came a troubling discovery. Daniel had been seen near the church on the morning Emily vanished, contradicting his initial statements. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured him pacing outside his car, checking his phone repeatedly. When asked about it, his demeanor shifted. He became defensive, his words clipped. The more they pressed, the more cracks appeared in his story. And then, a chilling revelation emerged, one that changed the course of the investigation. Willow Creek was no longer the town it had once been. The once friendly streets felt suffocating, as if unseen eyes followed every movement. Doors that had always been left unlocked were now bolted shut before dusk. Parents escorted their children to school, their eyes scanning every shadow. Strangers were no longer greeted with a polite nod but with silent suspicion. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that Emily's killer still walked among them. Others believed it was someone from outside, a drifter passing through. But the most unsettling theory came from those who had known Emily best. Someone close to her had done this. Someone trusted. Tension escalated when another discovery was made. Near the wooded area where Emily's body had been found, a bloody handprint was uncovered on a tree trunk. It wasn't large, suggesting it could have belonged to a woman. The implications were disturbing. Could Emily have fought back in her final moments? The local church, once a place of solace, became a place of whispered confessions and hushed prayers. The pastor, a longtime figure of comfort, addressed the congregation with a message of hope, but his eyes held the same uncertainty as everyone else's. The killer was still out there, and no one knew who would be next. Law enforcement intensified their questioning. Friends, neighbors, even family members found themselves under scrutiny. And yet, for all the fear gripping Willow Creek, one fact remained unshakable. Someone among them knew the truth, and they were keeping it buried. The break came on a cold November morning, nearly a month after Emily Carter's body was found. A deputy patrolling the outskirts of town stopped when he noticed something unusual: a rusted-out pickup truck abandoned near the church's service road. The vehicle had been reported stolen weeks earlier, but what was inside changed everything. Blood-stained fabric, strands of blonde hair, a church bulletin from the morning Emily disappeared. Forensic testing confirmed it. The evidence inside the truck belonged to Emily. Someone had used it to transport her that day, and whoever had driven it had ties to the church. The town's fear hardened into something else: determination. The killer had left a trail, and now, for the first time, law enforcement had a direction to follow. The evidence found in the stolen pickup truck shifted the investigation into overdrive. Someone had left behind pieces of the crime, scattered like breadcrumbs leading back to the truth. And now the sheriff's department had a direction. Fingerprints were pulled from the church bulletin, a perfect match to a name already whispered through the town. A man who had been at St. Mark's that morning. A man who had spoken to Emily before she disappeared. His name sent a shiver through the town. He was someone they knew. A search warrant was issued, and when officers entered his home, they found more than they had expected. Hidden beneath floorboards in his garage was a blood-stained shirt, the same one Emily had been wearing the day she vanished. The town of Willow Creek, already on edge, erupted. Fear gave way to anger. People gathered outside the suspect's home, murmuring, demanding justice. But even with mounting evidence, the man insisted he was innocent. He claimed the shirt had been planted, that someone was trying to frame him. But if he was telling the truth, then who had done it? And why? The deeper law enforcement dug, the more tangled the case became. Emily had trusted this person. She had confided in him. And now the town was left with a disturbing realization. Was the true killer still out there, or had they already found him? The town of Willow Creek had waited for closure. It had waited for answers. But as the trial approached, the community realized that some truths would remain buried forever. Despite the evidence, despite the fingerprints, despite the damning confessions, there were still missing pieces. Some believed the wrong man had been accused. Others thought justice had finally arrived. But one thing remained certain: Emily Carter's death had shattered the illusion of safety in Willow Creek. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the hallways. Families gripped one another's hands, waiting for a verdict that could either bring peace or reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. The accused stood before the judge, expression unreadable. The prosecution laid out its case with precision, painting a picture of deceit, opportunity, and violence. The defense fought back with claims of planted evidence, of a rush to judgment. Then the jury delivered its decision. But was the real killer truly behind bars? Or had Willow Creek been deceived once again? Even after the verdict, the town of Willow Creek remained unsettled. Some breathed a sigh of relief, believing justice had been served, while others whispered among themselves, unconvinced. There were still unanswered questions, still missing pieces that gnawed at those who had followed the case closely. Then came the phone calls. Anonymous voices whispered cryptic messages to local reporters, hinting at secrets buried deep beneath the surface of the investigation. Files were missing. Testimonies had been altered. Someone, perhaps more than one person, had been manipulating the case from the shadows. The case was officially closed, but the truth had not been fully uncovered. One evening, a former detective received an unmarked envelope. Inside were photographs, old, grainy, but damning. They depicted a figure near St. Mark's church the morning Emily disappeared. A figure that had never been accounted for. A name was scrawled on the back of the last photo. It wasn't the man who had been convicted. The real story was far from over.